If you sell a coaching program in 2026, one of the big things that we shifted to a really long time ago was having an action-based program, not a learning-based program. And so in the podcast today, I'm just going to break down my thinking on this. And hopefully if you have a coaching program and you often see people not taking action or not really completing activities, I think this is going to be really helpful for you. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Jamie Atkinson. We're the founders of needaguest.com. We have 75,000 podcast professionals and high-level guests, speakers, and authors, and professionals inside of our business. And we really just help people get more exposure, grow the business, and ultimately get booked on shows to have a lot of success. Now, in this episode, I want to talk about how you can actually have more success with the coaching programs. And so I've had a number of coaching programs over the years. I've been in the podcast space now for over 9 years. We originally had a program we called the Podcast Profit Lab. We shifted to the Podcast Profit Accelerator. I had the Inner Circle. And then finally, we now have Media Firestorm. And one of the things that we noticed with all of these programs is that in the beginning, when business owners get started creating their offers and really trying to help people, I don't know if you know this to be true for yourself, but a lot of people, they dump everything they ever have known about their particular topic or expertise, and they try and put it all in their programs. And it's great in theory. You're like, oh, I've got so much to give. I've got so much of this knowledge in my head. But the problem is, and you may have experienced this, is it becomes very overwhelming. And so one of the things that we have shifted to in our own programs, and by the way, I've made this mistake. When I launched the Inner Circle, I had 52 weeks of content for this program and 52 lessons, and there was hours and hours and hours of content in there. And one of the things that I learned, in a painful lesson, is that to make something truly great, you have to be the filter for your clients. Your clients are busy, they don't have a lot of time, and you need to be the person that makes it easy for them to plug in and get results. Now, sometimes you do have something very valuable that you're going to talk about for a long time. Most of the time, there's a lot of stuff that you can just leave on the cutting room floor and still get really amazing results for your clients. And so one of the things that I would really encourage you to think about, whether this is the first coaching offer you're launching or the 20th, is really to break down your offer into not what do I want to teach them, but what action steps do I want my clients to take. And so when I talk about shifting from an action-based program from a learning program, a lot of people say, I want you to learn this. I want you to learn these principles. I want you to learn X, Y, Z. What we shifted to was, I want you to take this action. And what we often have found is that the less information we have and the more tactical, here's what you need to do, we put in, then the more successful we were able to help clients. And so what I would encourage you to think about here is step one, lay out not what are the things that you're trying to get people to do, but what are the action steps that clients take that actually create the results. Not only is creating an understanding of what you want them to do going to make creating the content easier, but from a delivery perspective, it's also something you can track. One of the things that you want to do is try and reduce down the amount of time it takes from a customer joining to getting to value. And if you can reduce down the amount of time it takes for a customer to get value, then intrinsically it's more valuable. And so if I walked up to you today and I said, hey, great news, I can build you a house. And I say, I can build you a house for $100,000 that's going to take 2 years, or I can build you a house for $150,000, but it's going to take 2 days. Which one do you think most people would take? Well, for most people, it's more valuable to get that outcome faster. And so step one in this process, what I would do is look at your overall process, your journey you're trying to take people from. And a lot of the time this starts with what problems they have, what's getting in the way, and ultimately the outcome that you're trying to help customers to uncover. And actually just map out with a pen and paper or in a Google document, okay, what are all the steps that clients actually have to take in order to be successful? And just first of all, do a brain dump and write all of that stuff down. Now, you're going to notice very quickly, it will probably fill up. Like, you're going to have a lot of information that's inside of there. And so once you've got your first list of everything down, and feel free to pause the podcast and go do this activity and hit play again once you're done. Step number 2 is you want to go and ask yourself, are all these things I wrote down actually necessary? And I'll give you a really good example. Back when we first launched Media Firestorm, we went through a process of trying to understand, well, how do we help people get booked on podcasts and how do we help people make money from podcasts? And one of the things that we knew needed to be true was that they needed to have a really clear offer and they needed to have an offer that was selling. And so step number 1, I sat down and I said, okay, step 1, we need the customer clear. So we're going to have in step number 1 what I'm calling a clarity phase, and we're going to help them get really clear on their offer. So even if they've sold it before or they've, had some success, just make sure it's really, really good. And I would take them through these different components. We now call it the core 4 of, okay, who are we actually selling this to? What problems do they have? What's my way that I solve it? What's the outcome at the end? And usually we would create, 3 pillars of the program that they would help them to accomplish. We always pick 3 because 3 is very easy to sell, it's very easy to explain, and it's very easy to execute. Any more than 3 actually becomes quite convoluted and difficult to walk people through a process. And later on we use that core 4 to really help you create a strong marketing message. So we went through that whole clarity phase process. And then step number 2 was, okay, cool, now that you've got the clarity phase, let's now get you clear on the podcast process. And then we would walk them through what they were going to talk about on the podcast there, what would be the perfect talk, how do we, structure everything to be the best way it possibly can. And you know what happened? We had clients that joined that were going through the process, were kept accountable, we checked in on them every week, and 6 months later, they still were not clear and they hadn't got to the doing part. Why did that happen? Well, it's because we told them, hey, until you're clear on this, you shouldn't do the do. And we didn't actually say that, but by making this clarity phase the very first thing that we put people through, we implied it. And people were like, oh, well, I'm nervous to do the actual doing part because I need the plan and I need to have clarity first. And so what we shifted to is we said, well, what if we just don't do any of this learning process? What if we just don't teach this? What if instead we get clients to take action, and then if it doesn't work, we address it then? And so what we did was we completely scrapped the clarity phase. We said, it's going in the bin, right? See you later. No more clarity phase. And when we did that, something really interesting happened. What happened was we made sure that when we sold customers, they actually had something that was already working. So one of our qualifiers to work with a client was, well, hey, look, you've got to have something for sale and you've got to have already sold it, right? Back then, we didn't have any revenue requirements, but we had a requirement of like, look, you have to have sold this offer. It's not something you've never sold before. And something really interesting happened. What happened was we got clients joining on day 1, and instead of trying to get them to learn a bunch of stuff, we just got them to do the action. And we didn't get them to map out their podcast pitch or ask questions about what to talk about. What we did was we got them booked. And so they joined, and immediately on day 1, we said, hey, here's your first couple of shows. Let's get you booked. And what we did was we went and got them booked on podcasts. Now, in our business specifically, when we looked at what actions actually led to sales, we actually uncovered something really interesting. And this is something that may happen for you in this exercise. When we made the list of what actions do clients need to take to get success, what we did was we also looked at ourselves. And so we said, well, what happened when we did this for ourselves? Like when we went through and got booked on podcasts and we generated the leads and then we tried to sell, what actually happened? And there was another really interesting thing that happened when we did this exercise. Back when we first launched this program, our process used to be clarity phase, get booked phase, and then we had this really cute and cool mechanism that we called a pop-up podcast. Now, this is something that we had used previously in one of my businesses, and long story short, it was kind of like an audio webinar. It was a 3-episode mini-series that you would give away for free. You would get people to go through it, and then when they went through it, the end result was that, they would book a call. And I'd done this before in my previous business. It actually worked really, really well. Very, very high value in terms of the content that we had taken people through. And so we put together this pop-up podcast. And so we were teaching all of our clients like, hey, this is how we did it, and this is the process, and this is what we did. Now, when we did this exercise to look at, well, what actions should our clients take, we also took a look at what actions we were taking in the business. And what was really interesting was the pop-up podcast wasn't actually driving sales for us. Do you know what was driving sales for us? Emails. We had 97% of all of our customer sales had come through emails, meaning we had done these podcast episodes, we'd got people to come and engage with us and join our email list, and then the majority of the people who ended up booking calls and buying had come through email. And this was like mind-blowing for me. I was like, holy shit, maybe we should be teaching our customers to do what we do that's working right now. And I know that sounds really fucking obvious when I say it like that. But at the time, I was like, yeah, this is the process that we're going to go through. And so what we then shifted to was really identifying a new value. And so, today, when we sit down with people and they go through our process, day one, we get them to get booked on the podcasts and really start to line up the opportunities. And then the second thing we do is we get them to send their first email. And when we get them to send this email, immediately, it just really sets things up for them inside of the business. Most clients, when they start emailing, the first 14 days of emails that we get them to send make a huge impact in their revenue. And going back to the point that I shared earlier about, well, why don't we teach people about the offer? Well, what we found was when we got customers to send 10 days of emails, and we made those emails that the customers would send very direct emails. We call these direct offer emails. Essentially, what we do is we reach out to the audience and say, hey, this is what I've got. Do you want it? In a variety of different ways. Well, what happened when we got the clients to send those emails is that we actually figured out whether the offer worked or whether it didn't work. And we figured out because if the offer was good, it would get clicks. There would be people that would visit the page, and there'd be people that book calls. And if the offer was really good, there would be people that bought. And so what we figured out was, instead of taking customers through a clarity phase where we taught them all of the information about how to build this stuff, what we did instead was get them to take action, which would tell us if there was a problem. And if there wasn't a problem, we would just move forward and do things to the best of our ability. And this goes back to one of the theories that we talk about a lot in business, which is a theory of being average. And I'll probably do a podcast episode on this later. But our theory of being average is very simple. Most people strive to make things perfect. And by striving to make things perfect, they spend an enormous amount of time on activities where actually the thing they had was probably good enough to be able to have success. I remember years ago hearing this amazing story about Spotify, where Spotify had this cost to acquire a customer that was tremendously high, and the amount that they earned from their customers was tremendously low. And the number that the CEO stated all the time is, he said, yeah, but that's good enough. It's good enough to grow. We can grow with those numbers. And so a really good example of this would be, if you were going out and you started getting booked on podcasts and you started putting your message out there, imagine that you already had a freebie that you were giving away. Imagine that you already had a sales call process that was working, and you already had an offer that was selling. Now, we could get you going through a process to make the perfect podcast funnel. We could redesign everything, film new videos, change all of those components. And if we got it right, maybe we would get a little bit of an improvement. Maybe your opt-in rate would go from 25% to like 35%. Ooh, an extra 10%. Sexy, right? Maybe, your call booking rate would go from 3% to 3.5% or 4%. Ooh, an extra percent, right? And a lot of people strive to get these perfect numbers. But what we found in business to be true is that most of the time, if you've got average numbers, but then you just do a lot more volume, your business grows a lot faster. And case in point, we had our business doing probably about $3 or $4 or $500,000 a year, and we were constantly striving to make the funnel better, to make the opt-in rate better, to improve these parts of the funnel. And I was obsessed over fixing those pieces. But you know what actually caused the business to 4x and got us to, $2 million in the business? Well, it was just doing more marketing. Today, I'm not ashamed to say that our marketing statistics are average. If you're a business owner that does $100,000 or $200,000 a year, and you looked at my close rate, my show rate, my conversion rate, my opt-in rate, you would probably laugh at my numbers. You would say, ha ha ha, Jamie's conversion rate is terrible. Because, for example, our close rate for the marketing that we do via cold email is like 13%. Now, most people would say, Jamie, if you have less than a 20% close rate, you're terrible, right? And they might be right. Maybe our sales team sucks. Maybe we're terrible. But, the reason that the close rate is quite low is because of the way we're doing the marketing. But here's what's actually important. When we book a call, the call costs us around about $100 to book. But when our salespeople collects cash and they close deals, the average amount that they're making per call that they take, actually per call that gets booked, is like $500 to $600. So let me ask you this, simple math. If every time we book a call, it costs $100, and every time the salespeople take a call, on average they make $500 to $600, what would you do in that scenario? Would you go and try and fix things? Or would you just do more volume, right? And so, point being, a lot of the time when we keep things really simple, we actually can have a lot of success. We focus on just being average. So when we got things all the way back down to the basics for all of our clients, what we noticed was there were simple things that caused success and caused what we noticed is when we actually simplified things and took things back to the basics with our clients, we noticed that there were certain things that were very obviously creating success. Now, what I would challenge you to think about here in your process is I would challenge you to think through and first identify what actions do my clients need to take to be successful? And then secondarily, go through that list and cut anything that actually is not important. And what I mean by that is not to say, is this important to have, but is it important for me to talk about this with my clients inside of this process? Now, one of the things that we do with an action-based program is that if a client has a problem and we identify this in the steps, we're like, okay, take this action. And then when you take this action, and we lay this out in the content in the portal, we say, if you don't achieve this result, here's what to do, right? And we'll track it and we'll intervene with our coaching team. And a lot of the time we'll still have some of that content that they need, but it's not front and center. It's to the side, it's hidden, it's only accessible when they get stuck on something, and then we give them the content that's necessary. And if you change the way that you think about this process and you cut everything back to what are the simplest actions that I take and my clients can take to get a result, and then you build the program around just the actions they need to take, well, then what happens is your program becomes a lot lighter, the material becomes significantly easier to go through, your customers get less confused, and you can actually make a very simple roadmap for what people need to do to have success. And let me tell you, every time we cut back, every time we simplify, and every time we make things easy for our clients, we get overwhelming feedback that they like it. They're like, yes, this is great. This is simple. I know what to do next. And so if you haven't considered this before, and if you ever hear from your clients, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, one of the best things that you can do is really simplify and make it easy for them to understand, here's what you need to do. We are baby stepping them. We're giving them the exact steps they need, and we're making sure that we eliminate any fluff that isn't necessary. And if you follow these steps, you can have an action-based program that people plug into. They immediately start doing the actions they need to grow. And then the byproduct of that is a lot of happy customers, a lot more testimonials, and a lot more success. So if you like this, welcome back to the podcast. Please feel free to subscribe. You can listen to this on audio. You can listen to this on YouTube. Drop us a like if you're on YouTube. And feel free to jump into one of our playlists to listen to some more of the podcast episodes or stick around for the next episode.